When we think of ancient Rome, what comes to mind? Towering columns, mighty legions, and emperors in gleaming armor. Right? It's a civilization we remember for its incredible engineering, its profound legal systems, and the sheer scale of its ambition. Rome was the bedrock of Western civilization, a beacon of order and power that echoes through the ages. This is the story of the Rome you do you and read about in most history books, a world of dark rituals, political terror, and the silent suffering that propped up an empire. But Roman religion was deeply intertwined with fear and superstition. A flock of birds flying the wrong way, a clap of thunder on a clear day, or even a stumble on your doorstep could be interpreted as a message from the gods, and usually not a good one. Before any major decision, whether it was a battle or a business deal, they had to consult the augur. These were priests who would interpret signs, most famously by examining the entrails of sacrificed animals. Imagine a general about to lead thousands of men into combat, having to wait for a priest to inspect a sheep's liver to see if it had any blood. If the liver looked unhealthy, the entire campaign could be called off, regardless of military strategy. This deep-seated fear of divine displeasure led to some truly dark practices. When things went terribly wrong, say, a devastating military defeat, the Romans believed they had profoundly angered the gods. Their solution wasn't just more prayers or sacrifices. In moments of extreme crises, they resorted to a terrifying ritual: human sacrifice. Yes, you heard that right. It shows a side of Roman piety that was brutal and born from terror, a stark contrast to the image of a rational, law-abiding society. But their cruelty wasn't just random madness. It was a calculated system of control. In imperial Rome, the walls literally had ears. A network of informers, known as delatores, were everywhere. A careless joke at a dinner party, a complaint about high taxes, or even owning a map of the empire could be twisted into an accusation of plotting against the state. The reward for a successful conviction: a share of the accused person's confiscated property. This created a climate of paranoia and silence. People became afraid to speak their minds, even to their own family members. Senators, the most powerful men in Rome, lived in constant dread, knowing that a single misstep or a jealous rival could lead to their ruin, exile, or execution. This wasn't a system of justice. It was state-sponsored terror, designed to eliminate any potential opposition and keep the populace in line. The grand forums and senate houses we admire were often stages for this silent, deadly political theater. And then there was the foundation upon which the entire Roman economy was built: slavery. It's a topic we often acknowledge, but rarely confront in its full horror. At the height of the empire, it's estimated that as much as 1/3 of the population of Italy were slaves. These were not people in the eyes of the law. They were property, or what the writer Varro called vocal tools. Tools that could speak. They worked in the mines until they dropped, rode the galleys that powered the navy, and toiled on massive agricultural estates, the latifundia. Under brutal conditions, their lives were completely at the mercy of their masters. They could be beaten, tortured, or killed for any reason, with no legal recourse. The historian Tacitus describes a case where 400 slaves of a single household were put to death after their master was killed. This law was meant to ensure slaves would protect their master at all costs, but its reality was pure, unadulterated terror. And died in bondage, their suffering the invisible price of Roman glory. The famous Roman entertainment, the gladiatorial games, is another area where a veneer of spectacle hid a gruesome reality. The damnatio ad bestias, or execution by wild animals, was a common form of capital punishment. The crowd would cheer as they watched these horrific, one-sided slaughters. It sent a clear message to everyone watching. This is what happens when you defy Rome. He could arrange his children's marriages, sell them into slavery, and in the early days of Rome, even had the legal right to execute them. Women, while more visible and influential than in some other ancient societies, had no independent legal standing. They were passed from the control of their father to the control of their husband. While many Roman women found ways to exert influence behind the scenes, their lives were legally and socially constrained. The idealized image of the harmonious Roman family often masks a reality of absolute patriarchal authority and limited personal freedom. Rome was a civilization of profound contradictions. It gave us concepts of law and citizenship, yet it was built on the systematic oppression of slavery. It was a society governed by reason and order, yet deeply steeped in superstition and fear. Understanding this darker side doesn't diminish Rome's achievements. Instead, it gives us a more complete, more human, and frankly, more fascinating picture of this incredible civilization. It reminds us that behind every great empire, there are hidden costs and untold stories of those who lived in its shadows. Thank you so much for watching. If you found this journey into the dark side of Rome interesting, please hit that like button and subscribe for more deep dives into history. What other hidden histories should we explore next? Let me know in the comments below. See you next time. Ever wonder what it was like to hold the fate of an entire empire in your hands? For a select group of young girls in ancient Rome, this wasn't just a fantasy, it was their reality. They were the Vestal Virgins, and their story is one of immense power, terrifying responsibility, and ultimate sacrifice. Imagine a fire that could never go out. Not just any fire, but a sacred flame that symbolized the very lifeblood of Rome. As long as it burned, Rome would prosper. If it went out, disaster would surely follow. The enormous task of tending this eternal flame fell to just 6 priestesses. The Vestals, but who were these women, and how did they come to hold such a crucial position in Roman society? Their journey began in childhood. Between the ages of 6 and 10, Girls from patrician, or noble, families were selected for this immense honor. The selection process itself was a major event, overseen by the Pontifex Maximus, Rome's chief high priest. He would choose from a pool of eligible candidates, girls who were free from any physical or mental imperfections and whose parents were still living and were free-born Roman citizens. The moment a girl was chosen, her old life vanished. In a solemn ceremony, she was symbolically taken from her family and placed under the authority of the state. Her father's legal control was severed, a rare status for any woman in Rome. From that day forward, she belonged to Vesta, the goddess of the hearth, home, and family. Her new home would be the House of the Vestals, a luxurious villa located right in the heart of the Roman Forum, next to the Temple of Vesta, where the sacred fire burned. For the next 30 years, her life would be dictated by a strict routine and a sacred vow of chastity. This 30-year term was divided into 3 decades. For the first 10 years, she was a novice, learning the complex rituals, duties, and traditions from the older priestesses. This was her apprenticeship, a time of intense study and discipline. She had to master the intricate rites for public ceremonies and learn the secret formulas for preparing the mola salsa, a sacred salted flour mixture used in nearly every official Roman sacrifice. The second decade was the prime of her service. Now a full-fledged priestess, she was actively responsible for tending the sacred fire. This was no simple task. The flame had to be kept burning day and night, 365 days a year. The Vestals worked in shifts to ensure it was never neglected. Letting the fire go out was considered a catastrophic failure, a sign of divine displeasure and a dereliction of her most sacred duty. It was a crime punishable by a severe and brutal whipping, carried out by the Pontifex Maximus himself in a dark, secluded room. The shame was considered as painful as the physical punishment. The final decade of her service was spent as a teacher, passing on her knowledge and experience to the young novices, just as she had been taught. She was now a respected elder, a figure of wisdom and authority within the small, exclusive sisterhood. So, what made this life so appealing? The perks were incredible, especially for women in ancient Rome. Vestal Virgins were some of the most powerful and revered women in the empire. They were legally independent, a privilege almost unheard of. They could own property, write their own wills, and vote, something no other Roman woman could do. When they traveled through the city, they were transported in a covered carriage, and a lictor, a type of bodyguard, would walk before them, clearing the way. Everyone, including consuls and other high-ranking magistrates, had to make way for a Vestal. If a condemned prisoner on their way to execution happened to cross paths with a Vestal, they were automatically pardoned. Their very presence was a symbol of purity and divine favor. They enjoyed front-row seats at public games and theatrical performances, and were invited to the most exclusive state banquets. Their testimony in court was taken without the need for an oath, as their word was considered infallible. They were also guardians of sacred objects and important documents, including the wills of emperors and wealthy citizens. In many ways, they were untouchable, living a life of privilege and honor that set them far above their peers. But this power came at a terrible price. The most famous and most feared rule was the vow of chastity. For the entire 30 years of her service, a Vestal Virgin had to remain celibate. Breaking this vow was the most heinous crime she could commit. It was seen as an act of treason against the state, a profound pollution of the sacred trust placed in her. The Romans believed that a Vestal's impurity would bring the wrath of the gods down upon Rome, causing military defeat, famine, or plague. The punishment for breaking this vow was horrifying. While the Vestal's sacred status meant her blood could not be spilled, the Romans devised a truly chilling alternative. The guilty priestess was dressed in funeral clothes, placed in a closed litter, and carried through the silent mourning city to a place called the Campus Celeratus, the evil field. There, an underground chamber had been prepared, containing a small bed, a lamp, and a meager portion of bread, water, milk, and oil. The Vestal was forced to descend into this tomb, and the entrance was sealed above her, leaving her to be buried alive. It was a slow, terrifying death, designed to purge the city of her perceived corruption without technically shedding her blood. Her male partner in the crime, however, was publicly flogged to death in the Forum. After completing their 30 years of service, the Vestals were given a choice. They could retire and receive a generous pension from the state. At this point, They were free to leave the priesthood and marry. For a woman in her late 30s or early 40s, this was a remarkable opportunity. Having served the state with honor, she was now a highly desirable bride, bringing with her not only a substantial dowry, but also immense social prestige. However, many chose to remain in the house of the Vestals, living out their days within the community that had been their entire world. The transition to a normal life after 3 decades of such intense structure and reverence could be difficult. Some historical accounts suggest that marriages of former Vestals were often considered unlucky, perhaps, because it was hard to adjust to the subordinate role of a typical Roman wife after decades of being one of the most powerful women in the world. The Order of the Vestal Virgins lasted for over 1,000 years, a testament to their importance in Roman culture and religion. They were a constant presence, a symbol of Rome's continuity and divine protection, from the early days of the Roman kingdom to the final years of the Western Roman Empire. The sacred fire was finally extinguished in the year 394 AD by the Christian Emperor Theodosius I as part of his campaign to abolish pagan practices. The house of the Vestals was closed, and the last of the priestesses faded into history. The story of the Vestal Virgins is a fascinating look into the contradictions of Roman society. They were women who held immense power in a man's world, but their power was conditional, tied to a vow that, if broken, would lead to a horrific death. They were revered as living saints, yet lived under a constant threat. Their lives were a paradox of privilege and peril, honor and horror. They were the keepers of the flame, the guardians of Rome's soul, and their legacy continues to fascinate us to this day. Thanks so much for watching. If you found this story as intriguing as I did, be sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more deep dives into the most incredible stories from history. See you in the next one.
Did you know that, in ancient Rome, virginity was considered a superpower? For the Vestal Virgins, it wasn't just about being pure. Their untouched bodies were believed to be a magical shield protecting the entire city of Rome. Think of them as living good luck charms. But this came with a dark side. If a Vestal Virgin broke her vow of chastity, Romans believed catastrophe would strike. Earthquakes, lost battles, even plagues, any disaster could be blamed on her supposed impurity. This belief handed immense control to the male priests who could use it to manipulate public fear. The Vestals' bodies weren't their own. They were turned into powerful symbols, their personal lives sacrificed for the sake of the state. It's a fascinating and chilling look at how belief can shape reality. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to subscribe for more hidden histories.